The work of a nation, the center of intelligence. That's the CIA's motto. Pretty powerful, right?
It certainly sets a tone.
Yeah, for an agency, a civilian foreign intelligence service, that often feels, well, mysterious. So you're listening because you want to get smart on important topics and you want the key info efficiently.
And that's what we're aiming for in this deep dive.
Exactly. We're unpacking the essentials of the Central Intelligence Agency, where it came from, its purpose, how it's put together, and, some key moments, the highs and lows of its history.
We've drawn on official documents, government sources, historical analyses.
The works, basically pulling out the crucial information so you get a clearer picture of the CIA's role and, frankly, its impact.
Right. And maybe a good place to start is that the CIA didn't just appear out of thin air.
No.
Its origins are really tangled up with World War II.
Yeah.
Specifically, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. A lot of key figures who later shaped the CIA, got their start there, learned the ropes in the OSS. But President Truman actually dissolved the OSS right after the war in 1945.
But the need for intelligence didn't just vanish, I assume.
Not at all. That led pretty quickly to the Central Intelligence Group, the CIG, in 1946, sort of a stopgap measure.
Okay, so post-war, there's this gap, this need for a dedicated intelligence body, which sets things up for the National Security Act of 1947.
Precisely. And you have to remember the context. The Cold War was seriously intensifying. That was a huge driver.
Makes sense.
Figures like James Forstall, Arthur Radfood, Sidney Mashbeer, Ellis Zacharias, they really pushed for a permanent centralized agency.
But interestingly, it wasn't like everyone was immediately on board.
Oh. Who pushed back?
Well, you had some initial resistance from parts of the military, maybe protective of their own intelligence turf. The State Department had concerns, perhaps about diplomatic channels being muddied. And even the FBI, which was mainly domestic, had its reservations.
Wow, okay. So hurdles right from the start. How were those concerns handled? Well, some shaped the discussions, like the clear line between foreign and domestic intelligence. That was always a big point with the FBI. But ultimately, the perceived threat from the Soviet Union and the demands of the Cold War sort of outweighed those initial objections. The need for a strong, unified foreign intelligence service seemed paramount.
Which leads us to another key piece of legislation, the Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949. This sounds like the one that really empowered the agency.
Absolutely. That 49 Act was critical. It granted the CIA really significant autonomy.
How so?
Well, for one, it exempted them from most standard congressional oversight requirements. And it gave the director, the DCI back then, the unique power to spend government money unvouchered. No receipts needed, essentially.
Wow.
And maybe most significantly, it shielded the agency from having to disclose its, quote, organization, functions, officials, titles, salaries, or numbers of personnel employed.
So secrecy was baked in from the very beginning?
Deeply embedded. And that secrecy became, a defining feature impacting how it operated and how people saw it. The argument was, of course, that this was necessary for effectiveness in a dangerous world.
So right away you see this tension, don't you? The need for secrets and intelligence versus democratic transparency.
Exactly. And that initial mandate was broad.
What did it cover?
It was meant to be the central hub for foreign intelligence, collecting it, analyzing it, evaluating it, getting it to policymakers, and, crucially, carrying out covert operations, secret actions. That became a huge part of its identity.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look inside the agency today. How is it structured? There's a clear hierarchy at the top, I gather.
Yes. Since reforms in 2004, the overall boss is the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, who oversees the entire intelligence community. The head of the CIA itself is the director, the DCIA, appointed by the president.
And below the director.
You have the deputy director, the DDCIA, who's like the internal manager, and the chief operating officer, the COCIA, handling the day-to-day running of the place.
Right. And then the different branches, the directorates. Let's start with analysis.
Okay, the Directorate of Analysis used to be called the Directorate of Intelligence. This is the brain, essentially. Their job is taking all the incoming information from spies, satellites, open sources, everything, and turning it into useful analysis for the president, for cabinet secretaries, for policymakers.
And how do they organize that?
They have groups focused on specific parts of the world, like Russia or China or the Middle East, and others focused on transnational issues, things like counterterrorism, cyber threats, weapons proliferation, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. Next up, the Directorate of Operations. This sounds more like the spy stuff.
That's the common perception, and largely accurate. This is the directorate that handles the clandestine side. They collect foreign intelligence, mostly through human sources, spies, essentially, what's called HUMIND. And they're also the ones who carry out covert actions when directed by the president. They coordinate human across the whole intelligence community, though the military, the Department of Defense, has its own spy service too, the Defense Clandestine Service.
Got it. Then there's science and technology. The Q branch, maybe? Maybe not quite James Bond, but yeah, they're the tech wizards. They research, develop, and use advanced technology for intelligence gathering. Think spy satellites, listening devices, that sort of thing. They were behind iconic tech, like the U-2 spy plane, often working closely with the military.
Crucial stuff. And you can't run an agency without the Directorate of Support, I imagine.
Absolutely not. They're the backbone. They handle all the essential administrative stuff: security, secure communications, IT systems, logistics, everything needed to keep the lights on and the operations running.
And the newest directorate, Digital Innovation. It sounds very 21st century. It really is.
Yeah.
It was set up more recently to focus specifically on cyber capabilities and integrating digital tools across all of the CIA's missions. Intelligence gathering, analysis, covert ops, making sure the agency can operate effectively in the digital world.
Which is obviously huge now.
Massive. And it's not entirely new either. Even back in 2013, the budget for computer network operations was something like $685 million. So they saw the importance early on.
Interesting. What about the executive office? I see a link to the military there.
Yes, the executive office provides support across the agency, and it includes the Office of Military Affairs, the OMA. That office is key for managing the relationship and coordination between the CIA and the military commanders, sharing intelligence, supporting operations, that sort of thing.
And finally, keeping lines open with lawmakers, the Office of Congressional Affairs, OCA.
Right. Their job is to be the liaison with Congress. The stated goal is to keep Congress fully and currently informed about intelligence activities, which, given the secrecy we talked about, is always a delicate balancing act.
Definitely. Okay, let's talk about the people. How does the CIA train its officers? This seems like a major undertaking.
It is. They set up their first formal training facility way back in 1950. A big step came in 2002 when Director George Tenet established CIA University.
Why then?
Well, post-Cold War budget cuts had apparently hurt retention, so this is an effort to reinvest in personnel development. CIA University now offers hundreds of courses every year for everyone from new hires to senior managers. And they partner with the National Intelligence University, home to the well-respected Sherman Kent School for Intelligence Analysis.
And there are more secretive training spots too, right, for the operational side?
Yes, places like Camp Peary in Virginia, often called the Farm, and Harvey Point in North Carolina. These are classified locations used for the really hands-on practical training for operations officers, spycraft, essentially.
And communications.
There's the Warrenton Training Center, also in Virginia. That's the main facility for the Office of Communications, training people on secure comms, technical surveillance, countermeasures, things like that.
Okay, let's touch on money. The CIA budget. It's famously secret, isn't it?
Mostly, yes. The total U.S. intelligence budget is classified, but we do get glimpses. For fiscal year 2013, for instance, a leak revealed the CIA's budget was around $15 billion.
$15 billion! That's a lot!
It is a significant chunk of the overall intelligence spending, and that covered HUMINT, signals intelligence, SIGINT, listening to communications, security, logistics, and covert action programs. Those reportedly included things like the drone program and activities targeting Iran's nuclear program back then.
Any sense of how that compares historically?
Well, back in 1963, the budget was estimated around $550 million. By 1997, the total intelligence budget was over $26 billion, so you see significant growth. And remember that unique power from the 1949 Act, the director being able to spend unvouchered funds, that adds another layer of financial secrecy and flexibility.
And sometimes the funding came from less direct routes.
Yes, there have been instances. After World War II, for example, a significant portion of Marshall Plan funds, hundreds of millions, were apparently secretly diverted to the CIA for early Cold War ops.
Oh.
Similarly, in post-war Japan, some money from the so-called M Fund, intended for reconstruction, was reportedly funneled to the agency covertly.
Yeah.
It shows the lengths gone to, sometimes, to fund secret activities off the books.
The CIA obviously isn't alone on the world stage. How does it relate to other countries' intelligence services?
Well, it has counterparts everywhere. Britain's MI6, Germany's BND, Israel's Mossad, Russia's SVR, France's DGSE, and so on. Interestingly, the CIA actually helped establish some allied services after WWII. like the German BND and the first Greek intelligence agency, the KYP.
So some relationships must be closer than others.
Oh, definitely. The absolute closest ties are with the Anglophone countries, the Five Eyes Alliance, Australia, Canada, the UK, and New Zealand alongside the US.
Five Eyes, you hear that term a lot.
Right. They have incredibly deep intelligence sharing agreements, special communication channels marked Five Eyes, which used to be called no foreign nationals. It's a very tight circle.
Any other specific examples?
Sure. For years, the German BND had a specific unit, Verbindungsstelle 61, whose whole job was just liaising with the CIA station in Germany.
Yeah.
Shows that kind of dedicated link.
Okay, this brings us squarely into the history. The operations, the controversies. This is where the agency's impact and the debates around it really come alive. Let's start with the early Cold War.
Naturally, the main target was the Soviet Union, but the CIA got involved very quickly in covert actions elsewhere. Two really prominent and controversial early examples are the 1953 coup in Iran, Operation AX.
Against Mossadegh.
Yes. And the 1954 coup in Guatemala, Operation PB Success, which overthrew Arbenz. And in Guatemala, you had the United Fruit Company's interests playing a significant role behind the scenes. These showed the agency was willing and able to orchestrate regime change.
And these had huge, long-lasting effects on those countries. But these operations didn't always succeed, did they?
Not at all. There was a failed attempt to stir up a coup in Syria around that time, which backfired and got a U.S. diplomat kicked out. Big embarrassment. And in Indonesia in the late 50s, a CIA-backed rebellion fizzled, especially after a CIA pilot, Alan Pope, was shot down and captured, proving U.S. involvement.
And then there's Cuba. The Bay of Pigs invasion is probably one of the most famous CIA failures.
A spectacular failure, really. The 1961 invasion by CIA-trained Cuban exiles was a disaster. It didn't overthrow Castro. If anything, it solidified his power and pushed him closer to the Soviets, arguably contributing directly to the Cuban Missile Crisis the next year.
And the anti-Castro efforts didn't stop there.
No. After Bay of Pigs, the CIA launched Operation Mongoose, a campaign of sabotage, propaganda, assassination plots, all sorts of covert nastiness against Cuba. They ran a huge operational base in Miami, codenamed JMWVE, just for these Cuba operations.
Moving forward into the Vietnam era, different kind of war and some really disturbing stuff emerged about CIA activities.
Yeah, things like Project Tiger, trying to get agents into North Vietnam, didn't work well. Much more controversial was the Phoenix program.
What was that?
It aimed to destroy the Viet Cong's political network in the South, but it involved identifying, capturing, torturing, and killing tens of thousands of South Vietnamese civilians suspected of being VC cadres or supporters. Huge human rights questions there.
And activities inside the U.S., too.
Yes. Operation Chaos was a domestic spying program targeting American citizens involved in the anti-war movement. And then there was Project Encultra, the infamous mind control experiments using drugs like LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, often on unwilling subjects. Deeply unethical.
Even Watergate, which was primarily domestic politics, pulled the CIA in.
It did. Nixon's White House tried to get the CIA to block the FBI's investigation into the Watergate burglary, clumsily trying to link it to the Bay of Pigs.
How did that play out for the CIA?
Badly. It dragged the agency into a political scandal, led to intense scrutiny from Congress and the public. This pressure cooker environment led to the release of the family jewels, documents an internal compilation of past CIA misdeeds, MKultra included. It really damaged the agency's reputation and fueled calls for much stronger oversight.
Okay, the 1980s, another decade of major CIA involvement around the world. Afghanistan comes to mind.
Operation Cyclone, yes. The CIA funneled massive amounts of support, weapons included, to the Afghan Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. Providing Stinger missiles was particularly controversial later on. A huge, long-running operation with very complex legacies.
And Central America.
The Iran-Contra affair. A real scandal, secretly selling arms to Iran, an adversary hoping to get U.S. hostages released, then illegally diverting the profits to fund the Contra rebels fighting the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, defying a congressional ban.
Highly illegal.
Absolutely. Elsewhere, the CIA provided significant, though covert, support to the Solidarity movement in Poland, helping undermine the communist regime there. And there were links, still debated, to Operation Gladio networks in Europe, stay behind anti-communist groups.
Then the Cold War ends. New era, new challenges, but also some notable intelligence failures.
Definitely. The CIA was caught completely by surprise when India tested nuclear weapons in 1998. A major blind spot.
And the bombing in Belgrade.
Tragic mistake. During the Kosovo War in 1999, the U.S. accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy because of faulty targeting intelligence provided by the CIA. Huge diplomatic fallout.
And spies within the agency itself.
Big problems there, too. The cases of Alder James and later Harold James Nicholson revealed devastating betrayals. They were KGB and later Russian SVR, moles who gave up huge amounts of classified information, compromised operations, and led to the deaths of agents working for the U.S. It also exposed how effectively Soviet disinformation had sometimes worked.
And leading up to 9/11.
Well, history shows there were efforts tracking Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda through the late 90s. The CIA even set up a dedicated unit. But ultimately, the intelligence picture wasn't complete. The dots weren't connected effectively enough across the intelligence community to prevent the September 11th attacks. A catastrophic failure.
Which, of course, reshaped everything. The post-9/11 War on Terror era saw the CIA's role expand massively.
Hugely. They were central to operations in Afghanistan right after the attacks. Tragically, the first American casualty there was a CIA officer, Johnny Michael Spann, killed during a Taliban prisoner uprising.
And the methods used in this era drew a lot of fire, right?
Intense controversy. Enhanced interrogation techniques, widely condemned as torture. Rendition programs, sending suspects to countries known for torture. And the massive expansion of drone strikes, particularly in Pakistan and Yemen, including strikes that killed American citizens like Anwar al-Awlaki, raised profound legal and ethical questions.
What about Iraq?
Another major intelligence failure. The assessments before the 2003 invasion, claiming Iraq had active weapons of mass destruction programs, proved disastrously wrong. That severely damaged the CIA's credibility.
And structurally, things changed too.
Yes, the 2004 Intelligence Reform Act created the Director of National Intelligence (DNI) position, taking over some of the coordination roles the CIA director used to have. The idea was better integration across all the agencies.
But there were successes too. Bin Laden.
Operation Neptune Spear in 2011, tracking down and killing Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, was a major intelligence and operational success for the CIA, a culmination of years of work.
And more recent operations, like in Syria.
Operation Timber Sycamore, the program to arm and train Syrian rebel groups fighting Assad. That also became controversial, amid concerns that weapons were ending up in the hands of extremist groups like ISIS or al-Nusra.
So looking at recent times, the CIA keeps evolving, adapting, but also facing new kinds of scrutiny.
Right. We mentioned the Directorate of Digital Innovation earlier, reflecting that shift to cyber. There have been internal reorganizations. And then you have revelations like the crypto AG scandal.
What was that?
The news broke that for decades, the CIA, along with German intelligence, secretly owned a Swiss company, Crypto AG, that sold encryption devices worldwide. But the devices were rigged, allowing the CIA to read the supposedly secure communications of over 120 countries. A massive intelligence coup, but ethically and diplomatically complex.
Definitely. And this trend of using contractors.
Yes, the increasing reliance on private contractors for intelligence functions analysis, operations support, IT, that's a significant trend across the whole U.S. intelligence community, raising questions about oversight, cost, and accountability. It's privatization of intelligence, essentially.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. The CIA's birth after WWII, its structure, how it trains people, its budget, its global web of relationships, and crucially, its history, a real mix of claimed successes, undeniable failures, and actions that remain deeply controversial.
It's undeniable the CIA operates in a complex, high-stakes arena, and its work, often in the shadows, has profoundly shaped world events.
Absolutely. Which leaves us with something for you, the listener, to think about. Given everything we've discussed, the power, the secrecy, the history of interventions and controversies, what do you think are the most important ways to ensure accountability for an agency like the CIA in a democracy? How do you balance the need for effective intelligence with democratic values?
Or looking forward, with technology accelerating, cyber threats growing, how does the CIA need to change? What are the biggest challenges it faces in the coming years to stay effective while, again, operating within ethical and legal boundaries?
Really critical questions. We definitely encourage you to dig deeper, check out the sources, explore other credible information to form your own understanding of this complex and vital institution. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.